Good morning, kids. At the end of the term, I like to talk with my students about what I think is the most important thing to have taken from my class. I know my classes are wide-ranging and challenging, and I know sometimes it's hard to zero in on what exactly is important, and I don't like to force people down a certain road at the beginning of the term. But at the end of the term, I like to try to kind of draw things together for my students and talk about why I teach the way I do and why I continue to teach when I really no longer need to for the money anyway. So I know it's hard sometimes when you're going to a relatively small community college in a relatively small town in the California desert. It's hard sometimes to think that what you do with your future is going to make much of a difference. And my classes are geared toward helping my students discover or reinforce for themselves that, in fact, what you do is the only thing that's going to make a difference. I have in my head, and it comes from being raised as a fundamentalist Christian. I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian sect so obscure that most of you've probably never heard of it. And I've, over the course of the years, examined many of those premises and found them to be seriously wanting, and I no longer spend, frankly, any time worrying about whether my immortal soul is going to get into heaven or not, or whether there's some guy sitting upstairs there to snap me like a twig whenever I do something wrong. But there are a couple of things that have remained with me from that upbringing, and that's the idea of salvation and redemption. If you will allow me to tell you the only thing I can get my little head around is the salvation and redemption of this precious world we share and saving it for the children who will come after us. And so, in terms of salvation and redemption and the kind of thing I've just mentioned, I'm led to the little quote by Wendell Berry in the video that I put up and asked you to look at that little section of it. And that is, when one's premises are wrong, the universe works against one. I take that as a statement of faith. And that's why we cannot look to famous people to save us, or rich people to save us, or politicians to save us, or even most of the people we anoint as clergy and religious professionals can't save us because their premises are wrong. And so what we can do about that is not change their premises, but what we can do is to make sure our own premises are right, so the universe cooperates with us whether anybody else does or not. And that comes down to this idea of critical thinking. To be presented with evidence, to examine the evidence, and to examine the premises with which I approach looking at that evidence, and then to ask myself the really hard question, are my premises constant with the conclusions I want to arrive at? In other words, is the universe working against me because my premises are wrong? And frankly, that takes a level of self-awareness that is hard to achieve, and I guess maybe some people never achieve it. So the way I teach my class, the way I do, is to hand you evidence and say, look at this evidence. What do you think about the truth of this evidence? Is it valid? Is it accurate? What premises are you bringing to the examination of the material? And do your premises obscure the process, or do they help the process? All of that's relatively easy to teach, relatively easy to give you. What's the hard part is, as Wendell Berry suggests and others, is if my premises are out of consistency or out of consonance with my goals, then I have to change my premises. It's that simple. There's no other option. And so my classes are designed every class I teach, every one of them has the same goal, and that is to get us to examine our premises for consistency with what we say we're going to try to achieve. And then there you have it. That's the end of my responsibility. To change one's premises, to make them consonant with one's ends, takes courage and skill and practice and things that are not really the responsibility of a class like this to teach. But to give you critical thinking skills, and hopefully then you will gain the courage to look at what's actually there and make the changes that are necessary. That's all it would take to change the world overnight, in my opinion. But we have to be strict with ourselves, and we have to realize those people that we set up to save us, like the famous people that we worship, or the rich people that we worship, or the powerful people, or the politicians, or frankly most of the religious professionals, those people's premises are wrong, and if you examine them carefully enough, you will find that their premises are wrong, and so therefore they cannot ultimately succeed. And my total vision of a successful student is a student who gets the premises right to gain the cooperation of the universe and succeeds in small ways or large. I don't know. You may never be elected president, but I can guarantee that you'll live well if these practices become second nature for you. The hard part is the growth that takes place after the class. The hard part is what we become once the week 16 is passed and the grades are in and you've forgotten my name and forgotten most of what you learned. What's left? And how will you use what's left to make your life consistent with your belief systems? And make your belief systems consistent with what needs to happen. Sometimes belief will stop you from doing what needs to happen, and then belief is something else, not belief. So that's why I teach my classes the way I do. The whole deal is to practice critical thinking, to practice examining premises, and to practice making judgments about the constancy of the premises. That's it for my classes. Then the big step is, can we change our premises to match reality? That is something that grows with the seeds that are planted, or doesn't grow with the seeds that are planted. So I wanted to share this a little bit with you. There's that Wendell Berry video up there. I'd love it if you'd watch the whole thing, but at least please watch those 2 or 3 minutes that I'm suggesting, because that will reinforce the main lesson I'm trying to get across. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, the only reason for getting an education is educated people will save us. I don't mean people that know stuff. I know a lot of idiots that sign their name with a PhD at the end, and they're idiots. I don't mean that, but educated people who can think critically and then make the necessary changes, those people will save us. The politicians won't, the powerful people won't, the rich people won't, the famous people won't, because their premises are wrong. The educated person can examine premises and get them right over a course of trial and error, and the educated people will save us. That's an article of faith. That's why I teach my classes the way I do, and it's the only way I know how to teach. Who knows whether it bears fruit or not? I may not know in my lifetime, but that is my hope and the faith with which I approach my teaching, and why I keep doing it. So that's it. Bonne chance, mes amis.